48.6, and Rogers 48.3.
You guys ready? Yep. All right, we good in the back? All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November 6, 2024 Bruce Township Planning Commission meeting. Our start time is 6:01 p.m. Dana, would you call the roll, please?
Ed Cupits.
Here.
Rick Hagelstein.
Here.
Randy Cant.
Here.
Anne Marie.
Here.
Boyce. Mandy Barnett.
Here.
Daryl Blaylock.
Here.
Jerry Vincent.
Here. All right, we have a quorum, so before we start the business part of our meeting, I would ask that you join us in rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. This is a public business meeting of the Planning Commission, but we do welcome public comments at various points throughout our agenda. If you haven't already done so, we would ask that you sign in on the table to my right there against the wall, just so we have a record of our attendees. Commission is made up of 7 Bruce Township residents appointed by the board. In addition, we have our township employee, Dana Buchanan, who's the planning coordinator. We also have Joe Tangari, who's a professional planner with Giffords Webster, who advises us. There will be opportunities throughout the agenda for public questions and comments. Generally ask you to keep your questions or your comments to 3 minutes. But if you're representing a larger group, we extend that to 5. We don't have a big group here tonight, so we'll carry on there. Just state your name and address for the record when you do come to the podium, so we know who you are. And please address the commissioners and not anyone directly in the audience. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So we've got approval of the minutes from the October meeting. Does anyone have any additional edits? 2 minutes.
Well, I'll start the conversation by I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented, unless someone has a change.
Someone has one?
Unless someone has a change.
No, I'll second.
Approved by, motion by Cupits, second by Boyce. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up is the approval of the agenda for this evening. Commissioners, you have it in front of you. Are there any changes needed to the agenda? Hearing none, I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Vincent, seconded by Cupits. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Agenda is approved. All right, so that takes us to our public comment. So we do have a public hearing, a continued public hearing from last month, so if you're here to speak on anything other than the poultry discussion, please come to the podium and share your comments. Yep, public comment.
Paul Okoniewski, 71970 Lasser Road, Bruce Township. Over the past couple months, there has been a couple of motions to table items, and I just want to refresh the Planning Commission on the proper protocol for that. Tabled motions should be short-term, 1 to 2 months with a date. So when you table something, you should apply a date to it when it's coming back. Normally, those motions are for short-term to work out issues with the applicant, or in this case, a ridiculous ordinance, and then bring it back for approval or denial recommendation. You currently have an open-ended motion tabled for a developer into next year. That needs to be resolved because that is not proper protocol at all. The applicant made a request, and that request has to be addressed to what is in the current master plan based on his merits of his request, not a future possibility. So there was no date applied to it, and it was improperly extended into sometime next year. So you need to rectify that, bring the developer back, and then he can come back, close his request. He can come back at sometime in the future, whenever that is, and renew his request. So that one needs to be addressed. And even the chicken one, when you tabled it, I think last month or the month before, you did not put a date on it. So you're supposed to put a date, November, December, when you're going to revisit it, so the people in the audience know that is the time that they could come back and address it. I just want to refresh you on that protocol, and it should be followed pretty strictly on when you table motions.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Evanch. I've been living in Bruce Township for about a year. I'm at 74103 Caney Road, and I got a great opportunity to do a lot of door knocking in Bruce Township with this most recent election, and it was wonderful to get to meet the neighbors. You know, the last 6 years I'd lived in Palm Beach County, it got so expensive that as a Navy veteran, my income, I literally could not find an apartment to live there because it was so ridiculously expensive. So there are certain things in the world, or certain things in the economy, that cause mass shifts of population. Obviously, that was very unique there. But getting to talk to the neighbors, and then going back to, I grew up in Rochester, went to Rochester Adams, so I know the area very well. My background in the Navy was heavy equipment construction, so I understand construction a bit. But getting to get a voice and a pulse of the people, there's a lot of people that moved out here from surrounding communities because it's a slower pace of life, because it's family friendly, because it has fantastic high schools, because there are so many wonderful things going on in this community, and obviously in Romeo as well. Romeo's got some great things going on. But the biggest concern that I was hearing was that if development isn't done properly, that this could turn into another Washington Township, or, you know, certain other areas of the suburban Detroit where it has no character and it's been overrun by commercial development, and that a lot of people, when they came out here, the lots were supposed to be large size. So some of these developments are not giving the large lot size, and then it causes overdevelopment. When you have the overdevelopment, then all of a sudden the roads are busy. Now, growing up in Rochester, I saw cornfields turn into subdivisions, and then all of a sudden you had insane traffic. It doesn't take long. Once the subdivision's put in 1, 2, 3 years, then you got to completely redo your road plan. So I just want to share that. I talked to maybe 100, 200, 300 people in Bruce Township. I didn't find a single person that was for massive commercial development. I didn't find a single person that's for subdivisions. And then even when this big development went over here, you know, the houses that are close together in that community, it affected the water wells of the people in the next neighborhood over, and their water wells haven't been right since. So, you know, take a lot of care and a lot of concern, because we have an opportunity to do something great. And as I've traveled the country, I traveled 11,000 miles to 39 cities in the month of September. I tell people that Michigan is one of the greatest kept secrets in the world. And so treasure this, that we have a great community here, and we need to take extremely good care of it. And we need to talk to our neighbors, and we need to talk to the community, and we need to be aware of what's going on and lead it in a good direction. Let's keep it rural, let's manage it well, and let's take care of the families in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing none, we can, no, we didn't have to open that, so we'll carry on to item 7, which is the continuation of the public hearing from last month. So,
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, could I ask Dana, the area that this gentleman was talking about, or do you have a list of the open items that we have that we'll be able to discuss under unfinished business?
Say that again?
Items which we have not yet resolved, is there a list? You said there's a developer that we keep pushing out. Do you
Yeah.
have those, and you'll be able to discuss that under unfinished business, is that correct?
Yeah, he's talking about the Muir property.
Okay.
That's
Just wanted
the
to
only,
make sure.
that's the only thing,
So
yeah.
you stay for that, it'll be discussed.
Does that need to stay on the agenda?
Discussed from what we're doing with it, just an update, right?
there is no update at the moment.
Well, I don't know, that's why I asked if you're gonna be able to say, you have update, you have no update.
No, it's,
Okay,
it's,
so now you
it's,
know. That's what I was trying to do, was avoid him sitting here for who knows how long, just to find out we don't have any updates.
yeah, if it's not on the agenda,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Do we do a motion to close the public comment? Can't remember.
We didn't do one to open it, so
Okay.
I don't think we did one to close it. No, Paul brings up a fair point, and I think we had 3 that meeting. We didn't handle any of the other ones that way because it was clear that that was not gonna be a viable strategy if we let everything table until we had clarity on if anything was even gonna change with the master plan. So it's a fair point. I don't know exactly how we'll rectify that, but the point is heard.
The open-ended one,
Yes.
you contact him and bring him back in, and then you make a decision based on the current merits and the current master plan. And if he's not happy with that, he can make another request in the future.
Okay. All right, so, last month we had the public hearing for the proposed chicken ordinance. Obviously, we were down a few planning commission members in that meeting. Hopefully you've all had a chance, I know some of you are watching it live. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to, watch that if you haven't, because there was a big turnout and overwhelmingly against the creation of an ordinance. So, for various reasons, as I'm sure you heard. So before, we will open the public hearing in a moment, but at first I want to have a chance for any of the commissioners, but specifically those that weren't here, to have a chance to kind of, you've had a month to kind of think it, like, hear that, think about, like, what was your takeaway? Based on the feedback from that meeting. Anybody want to go first?
I can go first. My takeaway with it was that it was too restrictive for the community as a whole. I understand there's issues in different subdivisions or smaller lot sizes with chickens, but the restrictions that were put on in the ordinance that was going to be proposed were too restrictive for people with larger pieces of property. And I don't think it would have been a fair ordinance to pass. And we're really not here to protect HOAs from, whatever issues they might have from chickens. So we have to think of the community as a whole.
Chairman, I have a question for Joe.
Sure.
Joe, in this chicken ordinance, you have a specified number of square feet up to 2 acres. And you specify a number of chickens that can be kept. Why? It seems to me like we've always gone with it's either acres and acres, or it's feet and square feet. Why was this one changed so that the first entry point was less than an acre? Because I did a check, and according to my handy-dandy phone, 1 acre is 43,650 square feet.
That's correct.
If we had
40,000 square feet.
Did not use that number.
Is the minimum lot size, and
Right.
so it was just done to match the minimum lot size of I don't recall which district, but So, yeah, we didn't go with 43,560 because we were trying to do a cutoff at that district.
And on the backside, you used 2 acres or whatever it was. So I'm suggesting that we make it 1 acre and 2 acres, and we're the same measurement.
Well, I would just suggest that before we get into talking about editing it, I think we first need to regroup, get the feedback of the commission, and then see if we're gonna move forward at all.
I'm just saying, that's where I'm gonna be coming from. Think about it as you make your comments. I think it's appropriate, I think it's fair, it's consistent with what we do elsewhere. And perhaps there was some exception made for a good reason, I don't hear it, so.
So the question is, do we want to modify what we have based on the public comments from last meeting? Or do we want to drop it altogether, right?
Yeah, ultimately, that's what we will need to decide, is do we drop it all together? Do we account for all of the feedback and come up with different language? Or, I mean, those are we could propose it as is, I don't think there's any support for that, so.
There's not, that I know of.
So those are the options, yeah.
It is interesting that there are places around us that do have some restrictions on poultry in particular. But then after the meeting too, how many complaints are we getting, and does it really justify doing an ordinance at all, is something I keep thinking about. Is it something that we wait on until there's more of an issue, or having more people complain and problems with the chickens? I don't know.
Are the public comments on the restrictions larger than complaints? How many complaints have we had? I don't know.
I
Good
would say
point.
yes.
Good
yes.
point.
There were significantly more comments at the last meeting
The
than
last meeting was
complaints that I'm aware of.
Yes.
standing room only in the last meeting.
Okay, that's what it sounds like. When this first came out, we had some complaints, we needed to make an ordinance, and which is not out of the ordinary, because we do have neighboring communities who do have these things, but maybe we've overshot it. Obviously, got people maybe outnumbering the complaints. So at this point, maybe we back off, or maybe we reconsider the amount of complaints we have, or possibly just maybe need to abolish the whole thing at this point, and then refigure it at a later date.
Jared, the public hearing's still open, right?
It is, but we haven't started that portion yet, so we'll get there in a minute.
So this is background check.
Yeah,
Doing it.
we're just getting you up to speed, so. Go ahead. No, either one.
I would just have a couple comments and impressions. It was very interesting, the number of, or the nature of the different complaints that people raised, all well taken. Some were to the extent that the township shouldn't get involved in this at all, and others seem to recognize that in perhaps closer in areas that something may be needed. Just an impression. The other comments I have are that after the meeting, I went and researched, and it was surprising, actually, some very close communities to ours, Armada Township, Emily Township, Lennox Township, Oakland Township, and Elmont Township all do have some language within their zoning ordinance, but they're a wide variety. So I'm just pointing it out. I'm not necessarily in favor of doing anything. I do agree with what Randy said about anything that we may do should not be at all intended to address issues within an HOA. And I also agree with comments that Mandy and Daryl made, is that, at this point, is it needful to do anything, or just manage it under the current conditions without changing anything.
Yeah.
And as long as it's manageable, there shouldn't be a need.
After hearing all the public feedback, I tend to agree with the sentiment. And I think what it boils down to is that it's just neighbors being considerate of their neighbors. And I believe I try to do so with my neighbors. I believe my neighbors do so with me, and we don't have any problems. But I think when, I have lived, not in this community, but in other communities where neighbors were less considerate, had barking dogs, and, it was annoying. And it was not being considerate of me or other neighbors. And that's where the, opportunity presents itself for problems. So I don't think we need the chicken ordinance, and I think the township already has the means to address when nuisances arise.
Okay. I tend to agree. I think we did hear from the supervisor, who has also expressed a desire not to move forward with this, and has indicated that he would look to deal with any issues that arise through the animal control ordinance. I think that would generally come, from what I read through there, I think the biggest control that it provides is around noise. But if that's something that is feasible for them to manage through this when the issues do come about, then I guess I don't feel strongly.
I think odors are included as well, aren't they, Jared?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
There's
obvious nuisances, so.
Yeah.
I might ask Joe a question.
Yeah.
What prompted you to bring that to commission? From time to time, you update based upon things you see going on in various communities. You bring them to us. I don't know that in the past we've asked for everyone, but we have asked you to review and advise. That's what your role is to advise. So what prompted, is this a regular review you do and this one just happened to hit?
This
What
was
was the reason?
This was,
based on those,
yeah, this was not originated by Joe.
Okay.
So this was originated, I believe Mike Tremblay brought it to the commission. I had not gone back to review that specifically, but it came through the township offices and to the planning
I
commission.
believe
Something to consider.
I believe there was a letter from Mike Philbrook asking for us to look into it because over a approximate 2-year period, I believe Mike Tremblay had received a few complaints. Philbrook had received, I don't know what the exact number was.
Right, that it was not a request for us to review it. It was bringing data to the commission that said, these are the complaints we've received,
Okay.
this number. And just kind of like, do you guys want to look at this? And then like Tremblay said, he also had received complaints in his individual capacity. And then we discussed it and moved from there.
Okay.
And Joe didn't bring anything until we had a discussion. I want to say it was in April.
It was, and I remember asking for, when, I don't know why we were talking about it, but I get calls on a regular basis, people asking me what are the requirements on chickens. And just, we don't really have anything, so, I was kind of discussing what.
That was at the very first meeting where it came up.
So the request to not have us do anything is only based upon somebody saying, I don't want you to do it.
What?
The feedback was,
based on the weight of
The
yeah.
township supervisor, as I understand it, said maybe we shouldn't be doing anything with that. That's the gist of it.
That's his opinion.
Right.
It's not a directive, but
And
yeah.
yet the planning commission had, through Mike Tremblay, for whatever reason, former commission chairman, the contact to the board came and said, and I'm asking Joe, did Mike Tremblay initiate it? Did other board members initiate it? What triggered it? If it's, and it sounds like we must have asked you. A member must have asked you.
Yeah, I mean, I think
We did.
Anne Marie's summary
And
is.
so now we're saying that member no longer is here, let's not clean up something that was perceived to be an issue.
No, I think the question is it as big of an issue as that warrants what was proposed? And I think the feedback is no, but that's what we're,
Yes,
Well, I give you feedback to the opposite.
I understand.
I don't
And
know
you are
what other
welcome to-
people were going
Yep.
to
Yeah,
say.
we were put to a task to come up with an ordinance. We had complaints, residents wanted solutions. We were put to that task. We came up with an ordinance that we thought was fair. We looked into it, we did our homework, compared to others. And when we come up with it, obviously, the rest of the residents don't want that. So maybe at that time, we need to rethink what we did. But no, our intentions were correct. We had a problem, and we came together to try to solve it. But if we need to readjust it, that's why we're here. That's why we talked about this. We're doing our best, but we may need to back down from our original opinion.
Yeah.
Right, the commission itself decided to pursue it. It was back in April. And that's when Joe there was discussion, and Joe said, I'll come back if you want me to with some information for you guys to start to look at. And we said, okay.
Mhm. And he proposed it, and it was discussed, and there was discussion on the smallest parcel, the largest parcel, but nothing came to a conclusion. We had a very large crowd, Paul and a couple of these other fellows were here, and we're just gonna drop it. And that's what I hear people saying, let's just don't do anything with it. Well, okay. You
I don't
don't-
think we've made the decision.
Well, that's what I'm hearing, the
Yeah.
suggestion is, and it bothers me. I just have to tell you, it bothers me. That, and there were a lot of people that were here, they've expressed their opinions, and now we're just saying, well, okay, we're not gonna touch it. Don't bring the doggone thing forward, don't have a public hearing unless you're gonna bring it to closure. That's my point. Sorry for being emotional,
No, it's fine.
but, come on. We're just gonna avoid it. We asked for it. Joe did it. We had discussion. I happen to agree with some of that. And the only difference is I have a question, which is why is it so many square feet as opposed to 1 acre to 2 acres? Well, in case we say square feet, other side we're saying acres. I think that's wrong. And if we are gonna go forward, I would suggest 1 acre to 2 acres, or X number of square feet, X number of square feet. I personally like the idea of 1 acre. So, that's it, I'm done. We can do whatever everyone wants to do.
Okay. Any other discussion before we go back to the public hearing?
Make a motion to open the public hearing. Oh, no, we don't have to make a motion.
It's already
Already
open.
open.
Yeah,
It's
sorry.
already open.
Yeah, it's already open.
All right, anyone here want to speak to the poultry ordinance?
Still me. I would suggest that the planning commission and the board members take this with a little bit of a learning curve. It's one thing to take a construction ordinance, compare it to other communities, height, width, whatever, and come up with what you think is right. When you're dealing with something like this, there was 3 days' notice to these people about that ordinance. If we had a week, you would have needed a bigger venue. I think you found out there was a hell of a lot more chickens in the community than you thought there were. But when you do something like this, it takes field work. How many people have been and talked to these people on Morency or Mellon that are raising the chickens here to talk to them? The one on Morency that I met, she has 24 chickens and a rooster. She said she's never had a complaint from any of her neighbors. What is she doing that warrants no complaints? What is somebody else doing that's maybe onerous that he's getting complaints. You need to get out and do a lot more research and field work before you come up with such a restrictive ordinance that says if you've got 10 acres or more, you can only have 20 chickens, when we used to mail order them, and it was a minimum of 25 for their survival rate, because they are in a small box and they stay warm. They keep them warm when they ship them. And then the post office calls you, you can hear the box cheeping in the background, you have to go pick it up. All right, so you need to, do a little more research. What's it take? Because most people don't go to the, Home Depot or whatever down here, Tractor Supply, to get their chickens. They're raising them for a purpose. They want them sexed. They get them inoculated before they, raise them up. So when you're doing something of this nature, I would just recommend do a lot more research before you come up with some kind of really looked like it was an Ann Arbor type of restrictive ordinance. And, over 1 or 2 acres, there should be really no restrictions at this time. We're not in that kind of a situation where we have houses upon houses upon houses. And if there's a problem between a couple neighbors out in the further districts of the area, they can call it in, and then the supervisor or somebody can go check on it and handle it on a one-on-one basis. Last I heard that we don't have dozens and dozens of people attacking each other because they have chickens. There's, a couple concerns. They should be addressed on an individual basis and not just a mass restriction. So I'm just suggesting take a little learning curve, do a little more research, and talk to people that are doing it, find out what they're doing wrong, find out what they're doing right, and strike a balance. You're never going to make everybody happy all the time, but you can strike a balance they can live with, and that's what we need to do.
Kevin Signery, 12,000 Kading. I honestly, I think this is kind of ridiculous, but I understand there are some out there that have chickens that get out, they don't keep them cooped, they go to the neighbors, they cause problems. People like that, I'm on board with you going to their house and saying, this is what you got to do to take care of it. Setting an ordinance for everyone the way you are, it doesn't make any sense. Like I said, I have about 1.25 acres. I could have 5 chickens. Well, I have 7 people in my family, so 5 chickens doesn't work. I don't know if Ann can say anything or she's able to speak. She lives behind me. I don't know if my chickens have ever been a problem for her. My neighbors all seem to love them. They have parties, they line the fence and they throw food to them, they hang out with them, and they are smart. I know I said it before and I think people giggled, but I train my chickens. They don't go on my pool deck, they don't go on my patio, they stay off where they're not allowed to go, just like a dog. You tell them and enough times they listen. But with that being said, I don't want to have to come up here anymore for these meetings. My chickens haven't bothered anybody, but for those 1% out there that are causing problems, yeah, then I think they should be responsible. But I get some people aren't as responsible as they probably should be. So that's it. Thanks.
Anybody else?
But you never heard there was a trained chicken before. And that's true, they're very smart.
All right, last call. Seeing none, I would make a motion to close the public hearing at 6:34 p.m.
Second.
Well, I get yours. So, motion by Vincent, seconded by Hagelstein. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, so the public hearing's over. It's back to the commissioners. We need to determine what we're gonna do.
I'd like to make an introductory comment, which I think people can probably interpret what I'm going to say. Yes, there are people who have had chickens. They've been here for many, many years. They have large parcels of property. I absolutely 100% agree for them to be able to do that is fine. But also, what's happening in state of Michigan and all over the country, people who are in, I'll call them the tighter areas, are looking for a little bit of elbow room. They're looking for a smaller community. And they come to Bruce Township, Belmont, all the places around here. And to have just the way it always has been, as opposed to the way that it's going to be, because Bruce Township has the opportunity to grow in a number of ways, if they choose to do that. I personally think it's fair and appropriate, and there are some farms that are someday going to need to be sold. There have been requests for subdivisions, condominiums, larger parcel property. And this is going to be one of those that I think, and Mike Tremblay was getting a lot of the same feedback as his role on the board as well. And we're just going to bring it up, get a bunch of people, and I agree with a lot of what they said, but I also have a contingency of people that have the opposite opinion. And I have a homeowners president who talked to me, and we have an issue where I live, and a person just has chickens. We have 50 homes in that area. That would be 50 times 5, 250 chickens in single-family homes with not in barns and side garages and double garages, although there are some. And that group of people, they didn't get a notification that I'm aware of that this was on the market or on the agenda, and it's become an issue. I have people stopping and talking to me, and I represent everybody, myself, the folks here, all the folks that were here, and also the contingent who didn't get a notice or didn't respond to a public hearing. And that's why I asked Dana the question back then, I believe. Do we have a local newspaper that puts out something that says, here's the agenda for the Planning Commission? How do people find out about it? I don't have to answer it yet. At one point, I did see here in the Township Hall 2 or 3 local independent papers, and then there were this kind of information. So no one from the area where I live, and I don't mean just my next door neighbors, I mean around, no one got any notification because it didn't pertain to them. Joe brought something to us, it was put on the agenda, and it was made into a public hearing. It wasn't sent out to the whole community. I think the way you send out the notices are nearby property owners, but it wasn't a particular commission, a particular property owner asking for something. It was Mike Tremblay bringing it forward and saying we ought to do that review. And Joe, am I incorrect with anything that I've said? It happens quite often, unfortunately, but
Yeah, I mean,
did I capture it correctly?
a notice for a public hearing or an amendment that doesn't pertain to a specific property is published in the paper.
Right.
It's not sent to specific properties.
No? Okay.
Which it was.
Pardon me?
Which it was.
Paper,
It was,
Published in the paper.
yes.
All right. So shame on everybody for not looking in the paper. But a comment was made about a few minutes ago, and I disagree that it's going to be always the way that it has been. And it's, I think something like that, where it's that significant of a change, shame on people that don't check. And, you know, I can't say any more than that. But the fact of the matter is, there are people who have been here for a long time. There are people who have not been here for a long time. And we got into a situation where there was a public hearing, I got my packet, I came, and I couldn't tell anybody about it. I didn't get it in time. Shame on me for not looking at it sooner. But the fact of the matter is this,
Are we coming back to the chickens?
I'm gonna come back to the chickens with one final comment.
Okay, let's get there.
I will personally let everybody know in my area. But I also ran into other people afterwards who said, well, we didn't know. Thank you for speaking up. We didn't know anything about it. That's a problem in our area as well. So, having said that, that's why I react the way that I have. And when I was a kid, we had chickens. I lived in Pennsylvania. I lived in a small community that was rural. I mean, really rural. This is changing. Every day, when I wake up in the morning, I got Van Dyke. Car after car after car, truck after truck after truck. I also hear the trucks. I hear the cars. Everybody's going to work during the night. Truck, 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 until about 11:30 or 12 o'clock. Things are changing, folks. And we're not, I don't think, for this particular thing, to let a group of 40 or 50 people come in and speak should change us into doing some, maybe doing something more for the community at large, put it that way. And I know in the minds of several people here, I should just shut up, so I will. But I got a contingent of people, when we talked about this before, I am obligated as a resident of that community to let everybody know, and it's 50 homes, 2 people each, that's 100 people, are gonna be here. So, on the first go around, I did. And the second go around, I owe it to my neighbors and the people around. I'm done.
Okay.
Hey, Jared, could I just make a recommendation? We have, the township has a noise and a nuisance ordinance.
Yes.
I would suggest that those are looked at first to see if they can address that issue, or if maybe those need to be enhanced. Because what's happening is we have ordinances right now that aren't being enforced properly.
Yeah.
So when you add another one, it's, you know, who's gonna enforce it?
Okay.
All right? So look at what you have existing to see what, that'll work first.
So, it's not, again, there's a majority of the people on this commission that want to move forward this, and that's what the vote says, or to change it, that's where it will go. I'm not hearing that. As we talked before, which I think is part, maybe not all of the problem, but part of the problem is within communities that have HOAs, which I know you've mentioned you're a part of, they can still limit chickens in their community bylaws. So, there is, for the areas that still feel strongly about this, if we choose to not move forward, there are still avenues for those areas to pursue. And it is not, in my opinion, it's not like this is, if we vote to end this, it's not that it can never be resurrected. I think the challenge is, we heard 40, 50 people all against it, and nobody for it. So, it's one thing if we have competing opinions, and we need to weigh the balance of those. We got a written notice of support for this, but, I mean, it was, 50-1. So I think overwhelmingly, this is not viewed as something that is needed by the residents. And so it's really up to the commission to determine if we want to pursue it, and if so, in what capacity, or are we gonna drop this altogether? Before I let anybody answer, Joe, if we drop it, there's no motion. Do we need to make a motion to drop it, or do we
I
just
think you would want to have a motion to,
memorialize the
you know,
decision?
cease consideration
Okay.
at this point, regardless of what happens. You know, if you drop it, well, then it doesn't go anywhere. If you decide you're gonna forge ahead and try to come up with something else that's perhaps less objectionable to the majority of the community, you would wind up having another public hearing because
Right.
what you're gonna come up with is gonna be so substantially different from what you've already presented that it would necessitate a completely new public hearing.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we can talk about the number of people who spoke, but I think you also have to consider the depth and breadth of the comments that you received and the reasoning behind them and, you know, the experience that the people who spoke brought to their comments as well. There was a lot of depth there, so. It's not just that it was 50 people against, it was 50 people against for a wide variety of reasons and, you know, from a wide variety of perspectives.
Yeah, no, I agree, and there was clearly things identified in those comments that we didn't account for in what we came up with, so all good points. So all that to say, we're at a crossroad here, what do we want to move forward? Someone feels strongly about a motion?
Jared, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
At least as we get it going here.
Yep.
I'll make a motion that we cease our work on a poultry ordinance, and I think that's it.
I second.
So we got a motion on the table by Boyce, seconded by Cant. Any discussion before we vote?
My discussion will be, I believe that the board watches these meetings, and so two opposing opinions are being highlighted. And I represent my neighbors, don't necessarily agree with everything that they have told me. I have a neighbor here at the table. But to move forward with what was being discussed, I'm opposed to doing anything other than keeping it, no action on it,
Okay.
and then deal with it at the board level.
All right, Dana, would you call the roll, please?
Barnett,
Yes.
Boyce,
Yes.
Cant,
Yes.
Hagelstein,
Yes.
Cubits,
Yes?
Vincent,
Yes.
Blaylock.
Yes.
Motion carries. So because we voted to kill it, it won't go to the board. It will be dead. All right, moving on, the agenda. 8 is reviews, we don't have any. 9 is communications, don't have any. Did we cover Dana in 10 or 12? Dana, do you have any comments for us?
No, sir.
All right, well, cross that one off. Unfinished business. Any update on the agritourism, agribusiness this month?
No, just to reiterate my comment at the October meeting, that I see that the work is, well, a lot of it is done. I really think we need to wait, and it's gonna have to dovetail with our, wherever we end up with respect to commercial and industrial. Because a lot of the agritourism ventures that could be proposed as a special land use would definitely be broaching into something that's really more commercial in nature.
So when you say link to, like, are you talking about the master plan review?
Yes, yeah.
Well, so I could understand that from where it could be allowed or not allowed, but in terms of what you guys have been coming up with, ordinance around that, is that really, how is that tied to the master plan discussion?
Well, for instance, right now, our current ordinance allows for an applicant who owns an agricultural piece of property to come in and ask for a special land use.
Okay.
And that would permit them to do different kinds of things that, number one, wouldn't be allowed by our existing ordinance in the sense of, we allow cider mills and other ventures where somebody can go on the farm property, like a farm stand, like the farm markets. So the SLU would be asking for something over and above that. I'll give you examples, like what you see happening at Black's Big Reds, who now has kind of events, multiple events. They have a bar, they have a restaurant, right? So that opportunity to ask for that exists in Bruce Township right now. This would be something that's over and above that which is protected by the GAMS and the Right to Farm Act. So for our existing ordinance has some guardrails in it right now, but they're really not very thorough, in my opinion. And it would pretty much allow those types of special land uses to exist anywhere in the township, as long as the planning commission thought it was a good idea and recommended that, and then the board eventually approved that. I'll give you an example. I'm not trying to intimate anything here, but if we had a farm that was up Van Dyke and they wished to come in and request a special land use that would, here's a better one. It was reality. It was about 5 years ago when a couple came in and they wanted to establish an event center, wedding barn type thing, as well as some seasonal outdoor events on Boardman Road. The commission thought that wasn't a good idea and did not recommend any special land use, and that was supported by the board. If that type of request came in today, but maybe wasn't on Boardman Road, but was up on Van Dyke or up on McKay Road, and we approved that without a lot of restrictions that we don't have in our ordinance today, how is the community going to be receptive of that kind of thing? Because what we've heard thus far, and it's just been as a result of a few meetings, people are concerned about any expansion of commercial. And what we're going to be doing when we look at the master plan is assessing what we currently have, whether that's still on the mark, whether that covers any needs we may have from the future or not. So the point in saying how this agritourism stuff would dovetail with a master plan is we need to make sure from a master standpoint where we do or do not want commercial, if it's anything other than what we have today. Because if we get public feedback and it's like, we're not interested in that at all, then that tells us something about where we may or may not want to permit some of these expanded agricultural uses. Because when you talk about the things that could be permitted, they drive a lot of traffic and to a certain extent noise, and that has to be very carefully considered.
Lighting as well.
Right. to me, logic would say that when you look at where these types of things exist at other communities, they are on a main road. You know, Armada Township has 3 or 4 of them now up Van Dyke, or up Romeo Plank, and they have now a wedding barn venue at just past Powell Road on 32. You've got the winery in Ray Township, which is on, I think it's on Ray Center Road. You've got the Big Reds, 32 Mile Road. So, I mean, logic says that's where you would put that kind of thing, and not on a Boardman Road. But the point is, we need to know where we're going before we can, for instance, say, and again, I'm making this up, I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
anything, is that, yeah, we would consider it as a special land use if it's 20 or more acres and it's on a paved highway. Or Joe suggested at a certain point, just for discussion's sake, on the Van Dyke corridor.
They're not all in those kind of situations. There's one right here on Lake George Road,
Okay.
north of Stony Creek Road,
Oh.
in the middle of, but I'm saying you can
Oh.
compare to a neighbor.
The public comment is closed, Paul, you know that.
There's a neighbor you can talk to in Addison
Listen,
Township.
stop.
You know, you're not open to any ideas. You need to be open to ideas.
Paul,
All
you
right.
have a chance to give your ideas in the public comment. It's not throughout the whole meeting.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yes, it is, because you're not allowing public comment during your conversations,
Excuse me,
which
Paul.
nobody knows about at the beginning of the
Paul,
meeting. All right.
Can I bring it back on track? This discussion will be held as part of the master plan discussion.
Right, but there's things you need to do before that. Talk to your neighbor here in Addison Township.
Paul, we've done a lot of benchmarking. We've had a committee that's been working on it for months. We have gone through dozens of
They're
ordinances.
not all on paved roads.
Okay,
I-
point taken.
Right, and I said, this is not meaning to intimate anything. I'm just answering the chairperson's discussion on
Okay, we
why
need to bring it
it
back.
would dovetail.
All with respect to the fact that we need to bring it back here, former commission member. There's going to be plenty of discussion before this is all said and done, so.
Right, so
Yep.
that was the point. Let's see where it goes with the discussion around commercial, because these businesses that are operating are commercial. And it's why they're not protected by the Right to Farm Act.
Okay. Thank you for the updates. The other thing I noticed is business is the 5G. Yeah. All right, that takes us to new business, which is the master plan discussion. So as everybody, as the commissioners know, we kicked off this process to start to look at the master plan. So Joe has some information to present to us this evening.
Job.
I'm not come over to where Dana is, because I closed the hall door.
I hope not.
I'll drag one of the small ones.
Oh, you can use this one. Oh, whatever you need, Joe. Oh, okay. Can you do one for me? Do that one?
Okay, so this is intended to be an introduction to this master plan update. And we're really going to focus on kind of the process, what are we doing, and some background information about the township that kind of gives us a basis for thinking about how the township is growing and what its future looks like. So just to start out, I'm going to talk a little bit about master planning in Michigan. So we are authorized by the Planning Enabling Act, which is PA 33 of 2008, to prepare master plans for communities. The master plan considers growth and how to direct it. It sets policy, goals, and objectives for land use in the community. It is generally pretty focused on land use. Some of the goals and objectives of a master plan might speak to other things. They might speak to, limiting noise and stuff like that that might fall outside of a zoning ordinance ultimately. But generally speaking, zoning is the principal tool for implementing a master plan. In fact, a master plan creates the basis for zoning. You cannot adopt a zoning ordinance if you do not have a master plan in place for your community. A master plan does consider the whole community. A master plan update, which is what we're working on, is typically focused on a specific area or topic, or multiple. The statute sets forth a process for completing a master plan. So the first thing you have to do is send notices of intent to plan.
Done.
Yes, which is done, to neighboring communities, various county and state agencies such as the Department of Roads and MDOT and major utilities. From there you move into plan creation, and there's a lot to plan creation. It's not just writing the plan, it's all the discussion, all the public outreach and things that go into creating a plan. So that's the biggest part of it, even though it's just 2 words in this slide here. Once you have created a draft plan, there is distribution for comment. So the Planning Commission would make a formal motion requesting that the legislative body, in this case the Township Board, release the draft for comment. And at that point, the draft or a link to it is sent to all the recipients of the notice of intent to plan. It's not required in the statute, but it should also be made available for public review. That just makes sense, I mean, if you're sending it to your neighbors, you should be also alerting the residents of your own community that they can comment on the master plan. The comment period allows anyone to review the plan and provide feedback to the Planning Commission. The comment period typically lasts 63 days. For a very minor update, that can be reduced to 42 days. The update that we're doing is probably substantial enough that we would look at the 63-day period. So after the comments are received, a public hearing is the next required step. Now you can do this a couple of ways. One is you can review the comments and then make updates in response before you set a public hearing. A lot of communities kind of set their public hearing for the end of the comment period, and then if they get comments, they deal with them at the public hearing. I like the first method first better because it gives you a chance to actually massage your draft before you set your hearing. At the hearing, the Planning Commission votes to adopt the plan, and a master plan has to be adopted by the Planning Commission in order to be valid. The legislative body can exercise the option to also adopt the master plan. If the legislative body opts to exercise that option, when the plan makes it to the legislative body, they can request changes to the plan. If the Township Board were to do that, the entire process does get repeated. You send out your notice of intent again, you have another public hearing and all that. Another comment period, everything. And then once you've adopted a master plan, this is often forgotten, but implementation is your next step. You actually have to start doing things to implement that plan. And as I said, the zoning ordinance is the chief instrument for implementing a master plan. So usually that means you're looking at amending your zoning ordinance. Bruce's last master plan was adopted in 2016. The plan was updated in 2018. The only change that was made at the time was that the boundaries of the water and sewer districts were adjusted to match each other. The Planning Commission reaffirmed the plan after review in 2021. That was 5 years after the previous adoption, so that's generally the timeline that's set forth in the statute, is that you're supposed to review your master plan every 5 years. This year, early this year, the PC and the board decided to move forward with an update focused on industrial and commercial land and uses. In general, that was prompted by a sharp rise in rezoning requests and site plans. So one of the things that you do when you're creating a master plan is that you consult a lot of data. The primary data sources are typically going to be the U.S. Census, the American Community Survey, and SEMCOG, which is the, if you're not familiar with SEMCOG, that's the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, which covers a 7-county area in Southeast Michigan, which includes Macomb County. It does not include Lapeer, so you have neighbors who are not in SEMCOG, but everything in Macomb, Oakland, St. Clair, Livingston, Washtenaw, Wayne, and Monroe counties is in the SEMCOG region. The Michigan Bureau of Labor Statistics is another thing that we look at. Private market analysts also provide some key info. I've got some market reports, a couple that were just released for the second quarter of this year that I'll be working on summarizing for you for our next presentation to give you some context for what's happening with commercial office and industrial development in the Southeast Michigan market. Map layers from Macomb County. Some of these layers need some updates. When you look at those maps that I passed out, some of you will notice that there are buildings that exist now that are not on that map because the layer was last updated in 2020. So that's a little bit of what we have to deal with when we're putting this stuff together. Generally speaking, when we're using data here, we're trying as much as possible to exclude Romeo, which does its own land use planning. Of course, the residents of Romeo who live north of 32 Mile are also township residents. But again, Romeo does its own land use planning. They have their own master plan. So we're generally speaking trying to think about the portion of the township that is outside of Romeo. Because that's what we're doing the land use planning for. A master plan must include a future land use map. It's generally considered to be the most important part of the master plan. It identifies specifically which parts of the township are planned for which uses. It does not change zoning, but it does inform decisions on rezoning or the zoning of properties in the future. So rezoning happens in two ways. One is that the jurisdiction can initiate a rezoning based on its master plan. It can say we planned this area for, single-family development, so we're going to zone it for single-family development. Or a property owner can request a change to the zoning designation of their property, and then we would consult our future land use map to see, and the goals and objectives of our master plan, to see whether or not that request for rezoning is in alignment with what we're trying to accomplish with our master plan. And very often it's not, and we wind up saying no. So the purpose of this specific master plan update, we had a couple key questions. Does the township have an appropriate amount of land zoned for industrial and commercial development? And is the location of the land that's zoned for those things appropriate itself? And to investigate that, or those questions, we ask, how much land is currently zoned for commercial and industrial uses? How much of that land is vacant or near vacant or occupied by some sort of obsolete use or structure? Where are commercial uses that don't have commercial zoning? Because we do have some. How much commercial and industrial development is the township absorbing? When we say absorbing, what are we actually getting? What's coming here? What's the rate at which things are coming here? If we look at the amount of land that we have available, and we look at how much has come into the community, in the last 10 years, let's say, how long do we think that land that we have available will last? And then, of course, what do the residents of Bruce Township think? And that's something that we need to develop some outreach for. So, there will be at a minimum a survey and an open house. And then, of course, the main thing that we have to think about once we've developed a survey and a schedule for an open house is how do you get the word out? How do you make sure that the maximum number of people have the opportunity to contribute to those opportunities for input? It always stinks when you have an open house or something and 5 people come because the word wasn't spread well enough. And these days, we also tend to provide kind of an online companion to an open house. Not everybody can always make it at the time that you're holding the event, but you can ask the same questions that you were asking at the event, in a format that people can respond to remotely as well. So we generally always do that these days. It's never just the event at the venue. There's always a way to contribute to that event without actually attending it. So getting into what is going on in Bruce Township from a data perspective. I just have some population change information here that takes into account all of your neighbors, as well as the regions that you're embedded in. So if you look in that third column of numbers there, you can see that you actually have the second highest growth rate from since 2010 of any community in the area. Washington Township's the only one that's grown faster. You, of course, started from a lower number than Washington Township. So your growth doesn't represent the same raw number of people or houses or anything that Washington Township has experienced, but you are growing very quickly. It's part of being in this M53 corridor. The development pressure in Macomb County really goes two ways at this point. It goes out 94 and it goes up M53. And all you have to do is drive down Van Dyke through Washington Township and Shelby Township and Sterling Heights and Warren to see how the history of the way the region has grown, right? Utica's maybe a little bit of an outlier in there because it's an older village, but or city now, but it existed before everything grew in around it. But Sterling Heights, of course, is very built up. It's the third largest city in the state by population. Shelby Township has gotten more and more built up, and in the Van Dyke corridor, it's very solidly built up. Washington Township is starting to get to that point where M53 and Van Dyke, there's a lot of development in that corridor. So, when we have people come in wanting to do subdivisions here, they are really, thinking about where the growth has been going, and they're trying to kind of get in front of that wave. It doesn't mean we always necessarily have to aid them getting in front of the wave, but nevertheless, that's what they're doing. They're seeing where the growth is going, and they're going there too.
Joe, Can I ask a question about the data, or do you want
Yeah.
us to hold it?
Go ahead.
Where did you get the 2023 population number from?
That's coming from SEMCOG.
It's interesting because our census, US Census, in 2020, I think reported Bruce Township as 9,324.
Yeah, this number comes from SEMCOG.
Interesting.
Deserves checking into.
Sure, yeah. But
Thank you.
so, one thing that I will note is that SEMCOG is probably doing some estimation in 2023 because they're working with most likely American Community Survey data, which is less precise than decennial census data. So yeah, I could look into that if you're getting a different number. But at any rate, we know that we've grown quickly over the last 13 years. And it's just a matter of, kind of where we are. If you look at the only two communities on this list that lost population over the same time, it's Armada and Addison. They're not in any major corridors. They're off the beaten track. So you can kind of, you can really tell that it's really being on this corridor that has made a difference in terms of those growth rates. So we are growing faster than Macomb County. We're growing faster than the greater SEMCOG region. We're growing faster than Michigan. We're growing faster than the United States as a whole. SEMCOG does project more growth through 2050. They're saying in their projections about 1,000 people and 200 to 300 housing units. Now that's they're sort of reading the arc and trying to carry that out. But it could be a lot more than that. It could be less than that. We don't really necessarily know what's going to happen economically or anything like that in the meantime. But that's where SEMCOG puts its projection, that we will continue to grow. We're going to get a few subdivisions worth of new housing at a minimum. Population projections can't really account for, major developments or major changes. It's not going to happen here that someone would build like a 300-unit apartment building or something. But down in Sterling Heights it might. So if you get something like that, that can kind of fall outside of your projections. Age distribution is changing as well. We've really seen a drop in the school-age child population, and then an expansion of the 65 and over population. This is not terribly unusual. We see it in a lot of places. We also have seen a decline in household size, and this is something that's happening everywhere. Your household size here at 2.83 people per unit as of 2020 is not nearly as small as it is in a lot of other nearby communities. There are some inner-ring suburbs where it's down to like 2.12. So really small households. The number of housing units has, of course, risen. And then, again, we're seeing that shift toward an on-balance, just older population. And that's happening, across the country. It's happening globally, really. Outside of Africa and a few other small parts of the world, the population of the world is generally getting a lot older. Looking at housing and households, so really looking here at household composition. So we have a pretty major increase, almost a doubling of the number of households with seniors. We also looked at the number of seniors living alone, so that's gone from 127 to 397, so that's a major change, 212% rise. The number of households of 2+ people with children declined. The number of households of 2+ people without children rose, though. So that's an interesting finding, that we have houses with more than 2 people living in them, but there are no children. So that could be any number of things. That could be someone's parent moving in with them when they get later in life. That could be someone's child coming back from college and living at home for 4 or 5 years, because that person wouldn't be counted as a child by the census. They would be an adult. So lots of different reasons that you might have people cohabitating like that. You also might just have households where, in order to afford the house, you might have multiple people getting together. You might have 3 friends living together, and that's how they could afford to get the house. Actual housing characteristics, I think it's no secret that we are mostly single family detached housing here. We're mostly owner occupied. Very little rental housing, especially relative to most communities in Southeast Michigan. We have median housing value of $379,000, which is high. Median gross rent of $1,350, which is also pretty high. That kind of jibes with our median household income, which is $115,000 as of 2022. That's as opposed to an inflation-adjusted $97,000 in 2010. So household income rose a fair amount in Bruce Township from 2010 to 2022. 500+ households, about 19% of all of our households in Bruce Township make over $200,000 annually. We also have 600+ households, about 22%, that make under $50,000 annually. So there's a substantial amount of households at both ends of that bar. We compare our median household income to other communities in the area, and we can see that it is at the top. Much higher than the United States or Michigan at large, higher than the SEMCOG region in Macomb County as well. And then we have a couple of neighboring townships that are over 100,000, but nobody is quite in Bruce's territory when it comes to the median household income. That also tracks with a general rise in educational attainment in the population over 25 in the township. You can see that number of people with graduate and professional degrees rose quite a bit. Lot more bachelor's degrees as well. Generally speaking, I've actually got some numbers here. That educational attainment does correlate to higher income. According to the Social Security Administration, men with bachelor's degrees make approximately $900,000 more in median lifetime earnings than men without bachelor's degrees. The difference among women is $630,000. Men with graduate degrees make $1.5 million more than male high school graduates, and women with graduate degrees make $1.1 million more than female high school graduates over the course of their working lives. So when you see an increase in educational attainment like this, you should expect an increase in your median household income. These numbers, I'm just going to preface this by saying these numbers, COVID really knocked the hell out of these numbers. These are numbers from 2010 pre-COVID. They have not been updated since. I am hoping that we're going to have a release of new numbers soon, and I'm just going to have to keep an eye out for it. My whole team at the company is keeping an eye out for new numbers because things have really changed a lot. But generally speaking, the sectors in which people are employed hasn't destabilized too much. Again, I do want some updated numbers here, and we're gonna work to get them as soon as we can. But we have about 3,460 resident workers over age 16. These were the top employment sectors in 2020 before COVID really hit. So you can see we've got kind of a mix of industrial and, more office-based or like medical fields, and then retail trade is also in there as well. Retail trade is usually in there because lots of people generally work in that from any population that you're going to discuss. But professional and technical services and corporate HQ is kind of like executive or managerial level office work. Generally speaking, manufacturing, of course, is industrial, natural resources, mining, and construction. We don't really have any extractive uses in the township, but we have a lot of people who work in that field. Information and financial activities is another big one. Healthcare is big pretty much everywhere. And then I don't know why waste services is grouped with administrative and support, but that is also pretty commonly high on the list of employment sectors for communities with higher incomes. And then transportation, warehousing, utilities, which again is kind of an industrial category. More people leave Bruce for work than enter it. I don't think that's too surprising. About 11% of resident workers live in the township. Work in the township. I should say work.
I'm sorry, Joe, how do you get that information of where people are going to work?
This comes from, ultimately the census. SEMCOG also does some of its own analysis. And this, I'm also going to preface, this is older data as well. This needs to be updated. I haven't been able to update it because the data is not available.
The best that we have available to us today.
So we are seeking alternatives to this data that are more recent. Because one of the things that this does not account for is the fact that a lot more people work from home now. So it wouldn't necessarily destroy these numbers, but it would alter them somewhat. But when we do look at where what our employment destinations for our residents are, Sterling Heights and Washington Township kind of together, they have a pretty big chunk of it, and Shelby Township is also on this list, as is Romeo. So really, that M53 corridor is where a lot of our people are going.
Joe, one last. Where do you get the information? You may have said, and I missed it.
It depends. I got this from SEMCOG,
Okay.
and they're sourcing from the census.
If I were a worker, they would know I'm going to these different communities. How do you do that?
Well, it's part of the American Community Survey.
The
American Community Survey, yeah. So the census is done on a decennial basis, and that's administered to all households in the United States. The American Community Survey is an annual companion to the census that is done on a sample of households in the United States from which estimates are drawn. And the census provides 1-year estimates, 3-year estimates, and 5-year estimates. And the 5-year and 3-year estimates are generally a lot more reliable than the 1-year estimates because you're looking at 1 year of sampling versus multiple years of sampling that have been aggregated and averaged. So generally speaking, we try to draw from those 3- and 5-year estimates rather than the 1 years.
Another question. When you're putting this together in your company, you do this for a lot of places. Do you ever come back and measure last plan assumptions and what actually happened as part of your process, such that, or do you just take what this one says? In other words,
Well, On certain things, yes, yeah, on certain things, we would look at, what were we projecting, what were we thinking during the last plan? Where do we
The
think
last
we?
plan, we thought we were gonna get 100 new families. We actually got 200 new families, or 50 families, and so you adjust what you tell us on the basis of the success of that. Because we're taking it on face value, and I'm wondering how accurate it actually is when we do that.
Sure, yeah, the projections in particular are one of the tougher aspects of demographics, because again, there are so many potential X factors that could affect it, right? You're really, there are a number of ways of projecting where population might be or demand for, X, Y, Z. And they all have their pitfalls. But when you do look back in time, you might notice that, for instance, a particular community has a fairly constant share of the overall population of a county, let's say. And so you might project that share forward, but you're of course projecting two entities there. You're projecting the county as well as the local community, and assuming that that share is going to remain similar. And if the projection for the county turns out to be wrong, the projection for the locality will turn out to be wrong as well. It is difficult to get accurate projections. One thing I'll say about SEMCOG's projections is that they tend to be very conservative. They very rarely will project some sort of bonanza of growth for a place. A lot of the projections, they get to like 2030 and then they just they're flat. It's like, things are gonna be the same-ish, is sort of what they say about a lot of communities, particularly inner ring communities, which don't have a lot of room to grow. But I also rarely see them project major declines. And in a lot of communities that don't have room to grow, there will be declines because the household size will continue to decline. You're not going to get more housing units. And when you don't add housing units and the number of people in the houses that you have declines, you lose population. All those inner ring suburbs, Berkeley where I live, Clawson, all those places, they have way less population than they did at their peaks back in the 50s and 60s when there were 6, 7 people in every house. They're all much, much less populated now than they were back then.
I keep coming up with these as I listen to you.
Sure, yeah.
We had a joint meeting, I believe it was last year, year before. Mike Philbrook called a meeting and invited the Planning Commission, the board, the ZBA, that whole group of people that are in the, I'll call it the planning, managing, whatever word you want to use. And I wonder, I remember certain things that were said in there and others, I'd have to go back and look and see what documents were handed out. But I wonder if anything is planned to do that for this commission, because we have a number of new people. Have you heard of anything, Dana, anything that Mike Philbrook has talked about now?
Not Mike, but I think traditionally we've done it right around the first of the year. We've had the try.
Sometime in the first quarter, yeah, generally speaking.
Where the 3 boards had gotten.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so you would expect that's probably still going to happen.
We would.
Yeah, most likely.
In the course of that, given the outcome of the election, there's probably not a lot of change. I would assume. No one knows.
I couldn't tell you offhand, but yeah,
Well, I'm
no, we
hoping
definitely.
that before we really get real far along in the master plan, that we have such a meeting, so that we don't spend time thinking, and Joe thinking of what that crowd wants to do and accomplish, where there are disappointments and maybe some future change of thought. And so I'm just putting that out there. They'll probably watch the meeting, and I'm saying to them, let's get that scheduled so we know before we finalize or move too far. I don't want to go rushing to the right and then find out I got to turn back to the left. opinion of what?
Complement to this employment destinations is where are people coming from to work here. Probably the most interesting thing about this is that the largest single source of workers in Bruce Township, aside from Bruce Township itself, about 22% of the people who work in the township live here, is from outside the SEMCOG region, which is to say up M35 for the most part. So they're coming down from Imlay, they're coming down from Almont, they might be coming down from Brown City and other places to the north to work here. And the rest are mostly coming from, other locations in Macomb County. We do have a fairly substantial contingent coming all the way up from Detroit. But Sterling Heights is our number 2. Look at commuting. So Bruce Township's workers who work outside the home commuted about an average of 27.7 minutes in 2022. That's down from 27.9 minutes in 2010. It's not really that much of a change, but it is slightly lower.
Is that one way, Joe?
That is your daily commute.
Okay,
So.
so round trip.
And then that's 5 minutes longer than the average commute in the SEMCOG region, which I think you would expect given the location of the township. Most of those people drove alone. I don't think that's any surprise. We have a substantial contingent of carpooling and van pooling. The number really to note here, though, is worked at home. So back in 2010, that was about 3.3%. In 2022, that was up to 8.5%. So a lot more people working at home, not really having any commute. And that number, working from home, does not account for people who work from home 2 days a week and go to the office 3 days a week. They're still considered to be, working at an office. So it doesn't quite capture the whole universe of working at home. And I don't know that there's a source that has yet managed to get a handle on that. Maybe.
Say they 89% solely work from home?
Yeah, exactly. That they're only working from home. So this is another area where the data is interesting. So we're trying to look at, well, what do we actually have? So what's already planned on our future land use map that we've already adopted for commercial and industrial use? And the vacant numbers here are the ones I really want to talk about, because there's going to be adjustment to these numbers as we're going. We have about 674 acres that's planned for industrial use. A little less than 60 for commercial. Office is about 35. And then we also do have, this isn't really necessarily planned necessarily, but when we look at the areas that are planned rural agricultural, we've got about 41 acres that are in some sort of commercial use. Those are all in the M53 corridor. And one of them is the driving range, mini golf place. So that obviously is a substantial chunk of those acres. But you also have the medical facility up near Boardman, and then the doggy daycare place are also included in that total. It's when we look at the vacancy column here, I have to do more work, and Anne Marie has been extremely helpful in pulling some assessing data and trying to figure out what's vacant, what's not. But what I'm doing is first of all, I'm taking all the site plans that I'm going through every site plan we've had in the last 10 years, or well, since the last master plan, I should say, the last 8 years, and figuring out what use they all were, how many acres they used of the land that was zoned for whatever they're doing, and kind of trying to work up an absorption rate from that, where how many of these uses are coming here, how much of this land are we filling up over time, how much of it is actually vacant. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that we've got vacant land, but we also have land that, is zoned for certain things that is, there's a building on it, but it's not like a building that you could actually use for that use. It's obsolete for the purpose that the land is zoned for, or otherwise unsuitable. And there's land that's kind of substantially vacant. Another thing to think about is we have some land that's zoned for industrial use in the M53 corridor, and it doesn't show up as vacant because it's an extremely large parcel that has a use on it and it's an industrial use. But there's, 30 or 40 acres that isn't being used at all because they're only using a very small portion of the property. So they could potentially look at splitting that off and selling it to other users. So the vacant land number here needs to be massaged. And you really need to look at, not just, well, what's a parcel that exists that is totally vacant. It also needs to look at what's a parcel that exists that has almost no development on it, or has large areas that are substantially undeveloped that could potentially be spun off. It's more complicated than just looking at what's vacant, on a parcel by parcel basis.
Joe, can I ask a question about that to make sure I'm understanding it? So this says that we have 56.89 acres of currently zoned.
This is plan, the master plan. So this zoning's the next slide.
Okay, so this would be like future land use.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so different order. And then for the industrial, how does the proving ground fit in there at all?
We excluded the proving
Okay,
ground because
got it.
it's really its own thing.
Yeah.
There's not going to be another one of those. So we did exclude the proving ground.
So if this is planned, then does that, I'm looking at commercial again. That
Mhm.
means that we have 32 acres of planned commercial use that's currently vacant?
That is what this is saying, yeah.
Okay, then.
So when somebody comes in and they want to do commercial, and there's a property available, we could have a discussion with them. What other properties have you investigated that might be available in the areas that we want?
It's always a question, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Always a question that we ask when someone wants to rezone something. We had a couple requests to rezone a parcel of M53 to industrial, and that was one of the questions that was asked is, well, what about all this other industrial land that we've got? Why are we looking at this parcel specifically? And that rezoning was turned down ultimately partly because of that.
And some of the
there are
biggest
other
arguments
factors,
we
but-
run into with people is the fact that not in my backyard, you have other place. And I remember one in particular, not exact, but I remember a discussion where it was a development to the west, and it was vacant land, and somebody was coming in, and they wanted to put in a big building. I think it was a gymnastics building. And all the people that came, they were basically saying, we don't want to see that happen. This was residential, farmland, whatever. And then you have other people who come in objecting to development or decisions that will restrict chickens. Now, treat that lightly, but so we are broadcasting when we do this, and I guess to Dana and to the board when they're listening to sending stuff to us to consider for rezoning as we go through this. Is that the objective of what you do? Do you talk to the board at all, or are they just watching these meetings?
I mean, I talk to the board when I'm contacted by the board, basically.
Okay.
Um,
So we want to make sure we know, we tell the board if they haven't watched the meeting that we're in the process.
They'll know.
Yes.
Switching over to the land that we have zoned. Oops. We have actually a little more commercial land than planned when we look at the zoning. Partly that's because of that consent judgment at McKay and 33 on the northwest corner there. So that's 6-something acres that obviously was not planned for. And then when we look at the industrial, it roughly matches up with what we have zoned for industrial. And I think we were able to get a better number here for vacant, but it's still too low. We definitely have more industrial land for this, and it's a matter of disaggregating those parcels that are partially occupied or under-occupied from the parcels that are just unoccupied. So I'm doing that on kind of a parcel-by-parcel basis, and I'm trying to come up with some sort of classification system and a way to tell, like, all right, what is the potential for land to be broken off from this, so that we can get a better sense of what our actual universe of land that's available to absorb these uses is. Because it is substantial. It's a lot of land, particularly for industrial uses. And then, of course, we've got, some land that's been zoned commercial for a very long time that nothing's ever happened with it. And you kind of have to ask, well, what are the reasons for that? Is there a demand reason for that? Is there a location reason for that? Why has that land sat for as long as it has? And in the market data summary that I'm working on, I've got some demand data on commercial office and industrial uses, some regional vacancy data that could help us kind of explore that. But the maps that I provided you here, they're kind of meant to summarize, all right, where do we have this land planned and zoned? And you can see that there was one thing missing from the zoning layer there, and I actually drew it in with pen, and I added acreage to my table, so that's being corrected. Because that parcel should have come up in the zoning layer.
Joe, the people can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. And what we're going to do is we're going to drill in further on that with some aerials and things so that we can really investigate how much property is truly available or could be made available in the future, so that we have a sense of, what's the size of our net. We're going to have things falling in here. How big is the net that we have to catch them?
As part of that, do you consider, like right now, for what I call the shopping center area on the east side of Van Dyke, right up here,
Mhm.
I believe there's only 2 vacancies in there right now. And then.
Right, yeah, our
across-
local vacancy rate matters, definitely.
Across the street in the little plaza where Times Square is, I think there's only 1 storefront that's vacant right now. So will that, deeper analysis look at things like that?
Yeah, we're going to have to. I think that the thing that we really want to know is, like, over time, how much vacancy have they had? So right now is a snapshot. But if we could find out, over the last decade, how many of those spaces have been vacant for how long, that's really, like, what's your kind of aggregate occupancy rate over a decade.
Right. I'm just seeing a bit of a shift of late in that area, which is great. I mean, the stores are filling up. Hopefully they'll stick.
The other thing that we have is, that needs to be accounted for is approved but not built site plans. Because we just got a fairly substantial commercial development at the northeast corner of 33 and McKay. So that is probably going to take care of the demand for some period of time. We don't know how long necessarily, but we can try to estimate roughly. And I'm sure they've got market data that they're looking at if they're going to build a speculative project like that. That's the first substantial commercial development with a lot of different spaces to occupy that's been built in a while. So, that's probably going to account for a lot of the demand for a fair number of years.
How much do you look at the neighbors like Almont, see what their plans are? You have access to them?
Yeah, we have access to the master plans of all the surrounding communities. They've all got them posted online. So, yeah, exactly. So one of the things that you can do, because your common thread with a lot of these communities is the M53 corridor, you can look at what the planning looks like in all those communities. So, understanding what's to the south of you gives you a sense of what the pressure might be, right? Because that's where things are coming from. But looking north gives you a sense of what's leapfrogging you and what you might have, because, no community exists in a vacuum. So your traffic is partially locally generated, but you also have pass-through traffic, and you don't really have control over how your pass-through traffic grows because the communities around you are in control of their own land use decisions. In a place that's more built up like Rochester Hills, who I've done a lot of work for, that's something that we always have to talk about because traffic, of course, is like the number one concern there. And we say, well, okay, you can slow down development here, but that's not necessarily going to address the increase in traffic if Auburn Hills doesn't slow its development and Oakland Township doesn't slow its and Shelby doesn't slow its, because you're still going to have all those cars going through your community. So on M53 in particular, if you have a lot of development going on to the north of you, that's necessarily going to be sending traffic through you on this major corridor. And M53, well, it's a divided highway to the south of you, but in Bruce Township, there are driveways directly onto it all over the place, and you have to pull off of a side road. So, we don't want to put a bunch of new development on M53 that's going to have a bunch of driveways onto M53 if we're anticipating that pass-through traffic is going to get a lot worse and a lot faster. That's something that we need to be considering.
And you have access to, I'm just going to pick on Almont, everybody knows where it's at.
Yep.
Knows what it's like. I don't have any clue as to what the Almont board or the management group has planned. So you take a look at that, and do you update us when you're as part of this, so that we know that I'm just going to pick a wild one. Almont wants a car factory just at the very bottom. But do you have visibility to those kinds of things?
Yeah, we can absolutely look at that, yeah.
It isn't just us, it's the people around us that could have an impact on it.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
I don't know, I assume the board is privy to all that, and knowledgeable and so on.
Yeah, well, in the same way that we're required to share our master plan with Almont, Almont's required to share its master plan with us,
People want
and
us
Washington
to be very
too.
rural, right?
Yep.
I came out here to get some rural, not necessarily as rural as some of the property out here. But it would be really good to get a really good feel for what all these other places are planning and how it might impact us just by, they have growth, and then because we're close by, there's pressure to do certain types of growth.
Right.
A manufacturing plant somewhere else, then maybe they want to have a supply station nearby with the product that they use to make the product, the final product. So I'm glad that you have visibility to that, and the board will be able to see it as well as ourselves. Okay. And part of my questions are, because we do have some newer members, and I haven't been here that long, right? So I'm asking these questions, but I want to make sure that everybody understands where our sources of information are and so on.
Any other questions or comments?
I also find most people in this community don't mind driving the 26 mile to get their services.
Right.
We do hear that a lot, yes.
And that is stated as such in our current master plan, is that the kind of the thinking behind it is that people will drive, for instance, for their primary commercial needs. But it also recognizes in the same section that, we have to be cognizant of, what's happening, because it does say that, the need for further commercial would be up Van Dyke. I don't think we're there yet, just my personal take, but it does recognize that. Joe, I have a question on the little map. Now, I can ask about this later if you're ready to.
No, it's
To
fine.
wrap up for tonight. But if you look over at, what is that, 33 and west side of Van Dyke, where the Times Square restaurant is, why is it penciled in on this show vacant?
Are you looking at the future land
No,
use?
current.
Zoning.
No, that shouldn't be vacant. It's probably was supposed to be a process.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, so we got this on the county later, and we tried
Okay.
to modify it.
I'll look at
For
it
some reason.
in a little more depth because of all those data runs that I already did. I kind of have a sense of what might be a little.
Yeah, it's definitely not vacant, so.
Right.
um,
And then on the future land use map, way up at the green, rural agricultural, but it's marked up there in green at roughly at the corner of 37 and Van Dyke. Is that where the golf is?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the golf, yep.
Right, and then further up, the little green up there is the old hospital.
Exactly, yeah.
Facility.
Yeah, and there's a daycare in there too.
Can the people you're working with make this bigger?
What we're going to do is we're going to, I mean, this is the whole township, but the west side of the township isn't really
Right.
part of this discussion. So we're going to zoom in and produce some kind of like blown up versions of this. And right now we're kind of doing that parcel by parcel
Okay.
investigation, and that will be reflected in those blown up maps. But it's really that southeast area and then that area of industrial zoning are kind of the main
Right. I
areas. So.
think this will really be helpful to blow up because I think it would be instructive for the general population to look at it. And, for instance, we have future zoned a big chunk of, I'm guessing probably 10 to 15 acres at the corner of 34 and Van Dyke, that's commercial.
Yep.
Which incidentally is not its own parcel. It's a portion of a parcel that is otherwise has industrial zoning.
Right, I think
Yeah.
it's about 80 acres in total.
Oh, yeah, it's a
Right.
huge parcel. Yeah.
Right, and the future land use map says kind of the corner, which would be logical at the end of the expressway. It's in there.
And yeah, the parcel itself, like I was describing it earlier, it has an industrial use on it at the north end of the parcel, but I mean, there's 70 acres probably of land that you could easily split off and put other things on.
Right. This is also good because it shows, I think it's 3 parcels at the corner of Ebling and Van Dyke that are commercial.
Yes, yeah, there are a few there.
And then further up,
Those were grandfathered in because they were a saloon at one time and other businesses in there, so
but it hasn't changed.
we left
Right.
it.
And actually, at the, further up, at 36 in Van Dyke, that was a lawsuit settlement.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for putting that together, Joe.
Sure, yeah. Like, we'll do it again next month.
So between now and next month, anything we should be working on, researching, thinking about? You had some questions in there, like the overall questions you're trying to answer.
Yeah, I mean, definitely be thinking about those questions. And then, yeah, I mean, I would recommend going to the areas of the township where all this zoned and planned land is, and really kind of familiarize yourself with what's there and what's not there. Get comfortable with those properties so that, you know, when we're talking about, you know, well, this property has this on it, you can kind of just make the connection, you know? Yeah, because there's, you know, we have industrially planned and zoned land that has a courthouse and a Lions, you know, baseball field on it. So just kind of being aware of that is good practice.
I remember when we first brought this up, and again, it was probably about maybe the April timeframe again, and Mike Tremblay was giving us some background. And actually, you know, kind of where the industrial zoning is right now, the intent of that. He advised that back in the late 60s, early 70s, we probably lost about 60 acres that, you know, it's in white now because Romeo annexed.
Oh, sure.
That was supposed to be. And then I think, for lack of better words, what I call the RAS property, strategic, whatever they call themselves, that was 90 acres. And I think about 40 to 50 of that is now something else.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it was originally planned for industrial, and it had the industrial zoning on it.
Right. And that's another weird thing, where the Trilogy and, what do you call it, Orchard Grove are, they're still showing up on the rolls as zoned M1.
They are still zoned M1, yeah.
Right, but they're not.
Yeah, they're definitely not industrial uses, yeah.
Right. So, very interesting.
Yeah, that's actually data that I didn't get it into this presentation, but we did break out what's zoned industrial but used for something else entirely. That's an actual working use. So there's some of that.
Another thing, as I've been preparing for this, and it's kind of throw it out to all the commissioners, is, you know, this has been our first really exposure to actual data. And, you know, something to keep in mind is that this is an opportunity to share the information and, for lack of better words, to educate the public so they know what we're working from. And, you know, we're gonna have to start thinking about, it's great if we knew people would watch the meetings because they should be able to see this and get the information, as I assume we're gonna continue to do, but, you know, we need to think about, in my opinion, how we get some of this information in front of people so that when they're specifically engaged as part of the process, either surveys or whatever you called them, the town halls or whatever, or the online opportunity, that they have data available that they may wish to consider when they're looking at giving an opinion. What do you mean?
Sure, yeah, I have some ideas about how we do that, so.
I suggest contacting Macomb Township. They have a center hub with aeronautical avionics, which is a hugely growing area. Maybe you want to build that 33-mile corridor with a high-tech type of setting, rather than just core industrial.
Well, we do have big chunks of property that, on the future land use map, that would be for what we're calling IRO now, industrial research area, which I think falls into what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's similar.
So, Joe, for next month, what's the plan to cover?
The plan will be to cover the market data summary that I'm putting together, and then we would be looking in a little bit more detail about at the properties that have been identified on these maps, and trying to come to a sense of what do we actually consider to be land that has the potential to be developed for these uses, not just the raw, is it vacant, is it not. We're going to look at those obsolete and underutilized properties with this zoning and with these planning classifications. And we're going to look at, you know, the amount of land that's zoned for a particular thing that's being used for something else entirely as well. So those will be the two things that we're really digging into hard next time.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, one more question for you and Joe. I don't know the answer to this. I sat in that chair for a year or two. Joe, as this unfolds, are there public reviews that occur so that people today are rural thinking get a visibility to what is planned? And how does that unfold? And I'm asking, I know the partial answer, but we have a few new people so that they understand, because we had a crowd of people who were here last time who walked away pretty upset. They probably did not ever look at the master plan. Maybe never looked. So if we're going to be growing and developing, we need to be open with that, perhaps even more than we have been.
Sure, yeah, I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, there are ways that we can make sure that people are able to consult the material that's already been presented. And I'll work on that over the course of the next month.
I guess I'm looking for you because you work with other communities. And I wonder how other communities educate what the future is going to hold, so that these people that are moving from Sterling Heights out to be my neighbor at 30 6 in Van Dyke realize that there's a plan. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
And then I was an IT guy, I managed IT groups, I did worldwide traveling, I've done a lot of stuff, but to come in touch with a lot of people and just telling you where I'm coming from. The number of times that I was surprised by somebody saying, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know you were developing that system because I've been developing it over here too, you know? And I don't, maybe I was asleep, but I don't remember having a meeting where the public could come in and see the entire plan. You know, area by area by area, here's where the changes are.
Sure, well, yeah, it is part of the
Correct me
program
if
that
I'm
we've
wrong,
got.
man.
Yeah, that's part of the program that we've got. I mean, that's really what there's an open house built into the process toward the end for that.
And the other one, I'm gonna mention it again, I'm gonna talk to Mike Philbrook. We had a meeting, and everybody was there, the entire planning commission was invited, you gave a presentation. And all of the, the board members, and everybody, that has a role similar to this, but different. So that we could all have conversations and we could talk about, here's what the planning commission said, sees as we're due. And get feedback from anybody that wants to provide it. And we did that as we're going to call it the somewhat management group, which includes the board and all of us. And so I'm going to give Mike Trombley a call, not Mike Trombley, Mike Philbrook. I'm having coffee with him next week. I'm going to talk to Mike Philbrook and say that we need to do that. And more so to the public, and if they don't come, we can at least say, we had this meeting, everybody was invited to the community, no one showed up. Well, I'm done, again.
All right,
Thank you, Joe.
thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
All right, item 12 on the agenda is comments from committees and consultants. Joe, we heard a lot from you. Anything else to
I don't have
add?
anything else now.
I'm just gonna switch, but if you're gonna stay there, I'll stay here.
Anything else, Dana?
Don't need to move.
All right, item 13, comments from commissioners. Anything from anybody?
I always have a call.
Of course.
One of them is just feedback from the last board meeting. And Dana had mentioned this to the crowd of folks when they were here for the poultry public hearing, that the township is moving toward a new website by a
Yep.
company called Civic Plus. And at the last board meeting, you can look online, there was a presentation by one of the reps for that company. And it was quite interesting. It was a lengthy presentation, but the options and the depth of information that can be made available is really nice. And this is just my sense, the board did not vote on it. We'll obviously have a new board. There seemed to be very positive looking toward being able to do that. And they requested that the attorney, our attorney, review the contract, which is normal from when they do things. So that looks positive, and boy, it would be great if we had that right now, because it provides so much opportunity for getting information out like we're talking about. So that was one thing. The other thing was just a little project I found myself working on. Sorry.
Yeah.
I had heard some comments, I don't know if they were at the meetings or whatever, about, where we stand in terms of our housing stock. Dana actually sent something out, and we do a good job for planning for it. But I was looking at 2020 census data, it's just what I found online, and it's a little bit different than what Joe had. So my percentages are off. But we had, according to the data I saw, 9,300 residents. There are about 1,900 of the residents allegedly in 2020 were 65 and older. So that's quite a bit. It's about 20% of the township residents that are 65 or older. So then I looked at what's the housing stock that we have available, at least as of 2020, it was showing roughly 3,500 housing units. And then you think, what do seniors gravitate toward, you know, the older they get? And if you're lucky, you have good health and just fall over someday and you get to stay exactly where you're at, which is wonderful. And we have a lot of people that are that way. But I can tell you, living in an association of 20 people, that it is a condominium living that is attractive because it's somewhere in between what they all probably had in their life, which was their own house, sometimes big, sometimes small, sometimes with acreage, and the transition to a more of an assisted care facility, or at least independent, where, you know, it's very small. And what I looked at is of the 3,500 roughly housing units, we have 125 owned condominiums. So from the data I was looking at, that was roughly 3.56% of our total housing units is condominiums. That is shockingly small. We have 125 condominiums, and of those, 48 of them are biplex, like two, but they're 2 stories. We have 57 units in McVicker Meadows. They're standalone, but they were developed as a condominium. They're more what I would call approximating a house, right, 2 stories. We have 20 ranch condominiums in Bruce Township. That happens to be where I live. I was shocked. We do have 20 more coming that we have been approved for Westgate, which is more or less a mirror of Deer Park. Tiny, tiny bit denser, like 3% or something like that, as I recall. So it was interesting when I was looking at this. I had no idea that the gap was that big, and especially when my data is a little different. But what you're saying is the demographics are shifting so that there's more and more people who are over 65. Interesting. I did also look at, we've got a couple of legacy, what I'll call rentals. There's 3 units up here on the other side of the park. There's the little thing up Van Dyke before you get to Kading Street. I think there's 4 units in there. There's also some rentals further up, 4 units up Van Dyke. We do have the homestead coming, so that'll be 170, I think. I'm guessing there would be more of a, perhaps more of an apartment type feel. It might not be.
They're kind of ranch
Yeah.
units.
Yeah, ranch units.
Yeah, they're attached wall to wall. The original thing that they came in with was stacked.
Yeah.
These are all on the same level.
Right. So, I mean, that would be availability for seniors, although in a rental capacity.
Right.
And then course, we do have orchard growth, if, you know, if that's the direction you need to go. I just thought it was interesting.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
I have another
I've got a-
for Joe.
I got a comment regarding, it's a CMS system, right? New web system.
Civic Plus is what it's called.
You know, I'm sure they have a CMS, yeah.
I provide some feedback
There you go.
to multiple people at the Township Hall, because I watched the meeting where the system is very comprehensive, but the gentleman that provided the presentation, he said that it relies, if I'm not mistaken, on chat support, forum posts by existing users, I said chat support, and then tutorials, the three. So, you know, I'm on my computer every day, and I've got some applications that I got a financial application I use, and at one point in time, it was chat support, and it was absolutely miserable. Since then, the company's been bought out, and they've reintroduced phone support. So it's just, you know, like using BSA is a comparison. You have the ability to speak with somebody real time. And with this much stuff that would be in here, and if there's a problem, I don't think that the 3 levels of support without phone support would be a good way to go. So it's not something that we'll be using, but it just, I'll let you know, I shared it with multiple people in the office.
So, the condominium development industry has for years had the benefit of shared walls, has had the curse of shared walls. And when I retired and I couldn't stay retired, so I became a realtor. And I worked out of Rochester Hills and Terra Realty, I believe it was. Anyway, they had someone come in and to a real estate meeting, and they were talking about what they were going to be doing, this company. And it was all around the idea of people go to condominiums when it's just before time to die in their own mind, or they're too old to take care of that 5 acres that they have, etc. And they were coming up with a better way to build condominiums, which put in between walls some good sound insulation. So you got the benefit of more homes on the same land. Are you aware of anybody that's doing that in this area? Because it could be a big attraction for people who are moving, and seniors, that just don't like condos. I'm not in a condo now because of that very reason.
Ed, I'm aware, I own a condo that has that exact feature. Lombardo condos, they build a development down at 27 and Jewel.
Okay, so that's
Sure.
one.
My mother had a condo down there, and what they do for the first, they're ranch condos. So at the first level, there's 2 walls that are spaced probably about 8 inches apart.
Yes.
There's an air gap.
Yeah.
But the downside of the unit is that if you have a neighbor that has a finished basement, it's a poured concrete wall, so most of your noise transmission comes through the concrete. In the first floor, you can't hear anything.
So my question is, do you see a trend of that? And is that something that Bruce Township could profit from by having some developers who come in and entertain it?
Well, there's certainly a lot of that type of development. I mean, Homestead really is that. So you have some coming already, 170 units.
The trend out in the community that you service, are you seeing more of that, more
Yeah.
communities going after that?
Yeah, I've definitely seen more of it. Well, I don't know if they're going after it necessarily, but I'm seeing more of it coming to communities of all sizes. There is substantial demand in the market right now for attached housing. So yeah, there's a lot of people. You know, Robertson Brothers is a great example. They used to do nothing but single-family homes. They do all kinds of stacked units and stuff that's attached, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, they do all of that stuff, townhomes. They never, in the 80s and 90s, they wouldn't have touched that with a 10-foot pole, but now they do it all over the place. So yeah, it's absolutely become much more in demand.
Are there areas around here that predominate that?
I mean, I don't think you have to go too far into Washington.
Sorry.
Washington Township has a fair amount of that at this point, and Shelby and Sterling Heights also. So yeah.
If I may, there's a new concept called ADUs, called additional dwelling units.
Yeah.
And some communities are using them to limit sprawl, so you could put in a shipping container home or a small home on, let's say you had an acre or more, and allows for like a elderly parent suite, or maybe you got newlyweds that can't afford a home yet that stay there. That might be something that Joe could get you details on and consider looking into.
Granny flats.
Called ADUs.
Oh, granny flats.
I've seen them.
Pardon?
Granny flats.
Carriage houses, they've got lots of different names, but yeah, no, that's becoming more common as well. Actually, all the names they've got are there because it's a traditional type of housing that we banned in the mid-20th century, and now it's coming back because the bans are being lifted, essentially.
Economically, a lot of people just can't afford these homes.
Sure, yeah.
So lastly, I just wanted to take a minute and thank Daryl for all of his time and contributions and participation on the planning commission. So with the election yesterday, Anne Marie has been serving in the capacity of our board representative. She's going to transition back to the planning commission. So at the moment, we won't have a spot for Daryl, as we're expecting that the board will be re-selecting somebody to fill that role based on people coming in. So Daryl, it's been a pleasure. We loved having you, and we hope to have you back again in the near future.
I could add to that, I mean, I was impressed, first meeting you were here, you hit the street running.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you came very well prepared, very impressed.
Appreciate that, appreciate working with everybody here. Hope we made some improvements, and hope we did the will of the residents. At the end of the day, just hope everybody's, hope more people were satisfied than dissatisfied.
Very good. All right, anything else? Make the motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:28 p.m. Seconded by Kent. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.